The clinking of crystal glasses and the low hum of polite conversation at the Gilded Spoon always stop for one reason, or rather, for one man. Harrison Blackwood, a man whose net worth was only exceeded by his capacity for cruelty. Every night the staff would draw straws, praying they wouldn't be the one to serve the monster at table 7. But on a cold Tuesday night, when the billionaire pushed one person too far, the silence wasn't just broken, it was shattered. What you're about to hear isn't just a story about a waitress and a billionaire. It's about the terrifying, unpredictable power of a single voice against a mountain of gold and greed. The air in the Gilded Spoon was thick with the scent of money. It wasn't just the truffle oil drizzled over handmade pasta or the vintage Bordeaux decanting at the sommelier station. It was the very fabric of the place, woven into the plush velvet of the banquettes, polished into the gleaming mahogany of the bar, and reflected in the diamond bracelets of the women who laughed a little too loudly. The restaurant, perched on the 54th floor of a downtown skyscraper, offered a panoramic view of the city's glittering skyline, a constant reminder to its patrons of the world at their feet. For the staff, however, it was a reminder of how far they could fall. Every member of the team, from the seasoned maitre d', Gregory, to the fresh-faced busboys, moved with a kind of choreographed precision, a ballet of service designed to be invisible yet impeccable. But this delicate dance was thrown into disarray several nights a week by the arrival of their most valued and most vile customer, Harrison Blackwood. Blackwood wasn't just rich. He was the kind of wealthy that alters gravitational fields. He was the CEO of Blackwood Industries, a sprawling global conglomerate with its fingers in everything from aerospace technology to private military contracts. His face, a permanent scowl etched into weathered granite, often graced the covers of financial magazines. To the world, he was a titan of industry, a ruthless genius. To the staff of the Gilded Spoon, he was a plague. Tonight, the unlucky straw had been drawn by Ava Rosewood. Ava was not like the other waitresses. While many were aspiring actresses or models, their youth and beauty a part of the restaurant's aesthetic, Ava possessed a quiet, observant stillness. She was 24, with deep, thoughtful hazel eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her. Her auburn hair was always tied back in a neat, severe bun, as if to contain a wildness that didn't belong in this sterile, opulent environment. She worked with a silent efficiency that Gregory, the maitre d', deeply appreciated, often assigning her to the more discerning clients. But Blackwood was a different category of difficult. He was a force of nature, a hurricane in a bespoke suit. As she approached table 7, a prime corner spot with the best view, the usual ambient hum of the restaurant seemed to recede. It was a phenomenon the staff called the Blackwood effect. Conversations at nearby tables would dip, laughter would become more subdued, and a palpable tension would ripple through the room. He was already seated, his back ramrod straight, staring out at the city lights as if he were calculating its total value. He didn't look up as Ava placed the water glass down, the condensation beating instantly on the fine crystal. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwood," Ava said, her voice steady and low. "May I get you your usual to start?" His usual was a Macallan 25, neat. He drank it like water. Without turning his head, he grunted. It was the closest to an affirmative he ever gave. Ava retreated to the bar, her heart a steady rhythmic drum against her ribs. She wasn't afraid of him in the way the newer staff were. She didn't flinch or stammer. Instead, a cold, watchful resentment settled in her. She'd been working at the Gilded Spoon for 2 years, funneling every dollar she earned into a savings account for a reason far removed from this world of gilded cages and casual cruelty. Every insult she swallowed, every dismissive gesture she endured, was a deposit into that account. It was fuel. She returned with the whiskey, placing the heavy-bottomed glass on the coaster with practiced care. He finally turned his head, his eyes the color of faded denim, sweeping over her with an unnerving lack of interest. It was like being appraised by a butcher. "The special," he clipped, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Don't bore me with the description. Just bring it. And tell Chef Antoine if the scallops are even a fraction of a second overcooked, like they were last Thursday, I'll be having a word with him personally, a very loud word." "Of course, Mr. Blackwood," Ava replied. her expression a perfect mask of professional deference. She conveyed the message to the kitchen, softening the threat, though the chefs already knew the drill. When Blackwood dined, the entire kitchen staff was on edge. Chef Antoine, a man with a Michelin star and an ego to match, hated Blackwood with a passion, yet bent over backward to appease him. Blackwood's patronage was a twisted sort of validation for the restaurant. Enduring his tyranny meant you were at the top of the food chain. As the evening wore on, the performance continued. Blackwood would summon Ava with a sharp, impatient snap of his fingers, a sound that made her teeth ache. He complained that the bread was too soft. He sent back his appetizer because the microgreens were wilting with despair. He interrogated her on the provenance of the sea bass, demanding to know the name of the fisherman who caught it. Each interaction was a small, calculated act of humiliation, designed to remind her of her station and his. Ava absorbed it all, her composure unwavering. She refilled his water before it was empty. She cleared his plates the moment he pushed them away. She was a ghost, a perfect servant, but beneath the surface a quiet fury was simmering. She watched him interact with others. He had a guest tonight, a younger man in a suit that was expensive but didn't fit quite right, who fidgeted and sweated under Blackwood's verbal lashings. Blackwood was dissecting the young man's business proposal, tearing it to shreds with surgical precision and undisguised contempt. "Leveraged buyouts? With your credit line?" Blackwood sneered, leaning back in his chair. "You couldn't leverage a seesaw, son. Your projections are a fantasy novel. Go back to business school, or better yet, go back to whatever hole you crawled out of." The young man, whose name was probably Robert or James, turned a shade of crimson that clashed horribly with his tie. He stammered an apology, gathered his papers with trembling hands, and practically fled the restaurant. Blackwood watched him go, a flicker of something that might have been satisfaction in his cold eyes. He then turned his attention back to his meal, alone once more. Ava saw it all. She saw the fear in the young man's eyes. She saw the way the couple at the next table, celebrating an anniversary, fell into a stilted silence, their happy occasion tainted by his toxic presence. She saw how Gregory hovered nervously near the entrance, his usual suave demeanor replaced by a fretful anxiety. Harrison Blackwood wasn't just a rude customer. He was a poison that seeped into the very atmosphere of the room, turning celebration into tension and joy into fear. Later, as she served his dessert, a deconstructed tiramisu he hadn't ordered, but demanded she bring anyway, he committed his gravest sin of the evening. He was on the phone, barking orders at some unfortunate soul on the other end. "Liquidate the portfolio. I don't care about the market sentiment. I am the market sentiment," he bellowed, causing heads to turn. He ended the call with a vicious jab at his phone screen. As Ava placed the dessert down, he gestured impatiently toward his empty whiskey glass. "Another," he commanded, not looking at her. As she reached for the glass, her sleeve brushed against a stack of papers he'd left on the table. A single sheet, a prospectus of some kind, fluttered to the floor. "Clumsy girl," he snarled, finally making eye contact. His gaze was filled with a chilling, vacant disdain. "Is it that difficult? To place a plate on a table and retrieve a glass without destroying everything in your path? Perhaps this line of work is too mentally taxing for you. You should look for a job with fewer moving parts, something that requires no thought at all." His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp and piercing, intended for her ears alone. It was the casual, dismissive cruelty of it that struck her, the utter lack of humanity. Ava bent down to pick up the paper, her movements fluid and calm. She placed it back on the stack, her fingers brushing the crisp edge. Her eyes met his. For a split second, the mask of the deferential waitress slipped. He saw something in her eyes then, not fear, not anger, but a cold, hard defiance that took him by surprise. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same placid neutrality. "My apologies, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice perfectly even. "I'll get your drink." As she walked back to the bar, the weight of the evening, of the past 2 years, pressed down on her. Every swallowed insult, every forced smile, every moment of biting her tongue. She was a pressure cooker, and the valve was beginning to hiss. She knew with a sudden, chilling certainty that something had to give, and it would be soon. The tyrant of the gilded spoon had no idea that the silent, clumsy girl he'd just insulted was reaching her breaking point. The sterile white walls of St. Jude's Children's Hospital were a world away from the opulent crimson and gold of the gilded spoon. Here the air smelled not of truffle oil, but of antiseptic and a faint, sweetish odor of illness that clung to everything. This was Ava's other reality, the one that gave meaning to the charade she performed 5 nights a week. In a small, brightly decorated room on the 4th floor, her younger sister Penny was asleep. A thin tube ran from an IV pole to a port in her small hand. Penny was 9 years old, but a rare and aggressive form of leukemia had stunted her growth, making her seem even younger. Her face, framed by a soft, threadbare wool cap covering her bald head, was pale but peaceful in sleep. Taped to the wall above her bed were dozens of drawings, vibrant explosions of color depicting fantastical creatures, faraway castles, and a recurring motif of 2 sisters with flowing auburn hair flying through a sky full of stars. Ava pulled a chair quietly to the bedside, her gaze softening as she watched Penny's chest rise and fall in a steady, shallow rhythm. This was why she endured Harrison Blackwood. This was why she smiled at condescending patrons and cleaned up their messes. Penny's experimental treatment, their last real hope, was astronomically expensive, and insurance covered only a fraction of it. The savings account Ava so diligently fed was their lifeline. Every dollar was a drop of medicine, a day of care, a sliver of hope. She had been an art history major at Columbia, with a scholarship and a promising future. Her professors had praised her keen eye, her passion for the Italian Renaissance, her ability to see the stories hidden in the brushstrokes of a centuries-old painting. Then Penny got sick, and the world of art and academia had dissolved into a brutal landscape of medical bills and terrifying prognoses. Ava had dropped out, trading dusty libraries for a high-end restaurant, her dreams packed away like old canvases in a dusty attic. Her parents, kind but overwhelmed teachers from upstate, did what they could, but the financial burden fell squarely on Ava's shoulders. She was the one who was here, in the city, close to the best hospital. She reached out and gently squeezed Penny's foot. "I'm here, Pen," she whispered. "Big sister's here." Penny stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. "Ava?" she mumbled, her voice drowsy. "Hey, sleepyhead, how are you feeling?" "Tired. The chemo monster was mean today." Penny had names for everything in the hospital. The chemo was a monster, the IV pole was her metal tree, and the nurses were white coat angels. "Well, you beat him again," Ava said, forcing a cheerful smile. "You're the toughest knight I know." Penny managed a weak smile back. "Did you go to the fancy castle tonight?" "I did. Fought a few dragons of my own." "Was the big grumpy one there?" Penny asked. She'd heard Ava's stories about Blackwood, whom she'd dubbed Mr. Grumpenstein. Ava's smile tightened. He was in rare form tonight. She decided not to share the details of his insults. There was no need to bring the ugliness of the gilded spoon into this sanitized, hopeful space. They talked for a while longer, about Penny's drawings, about a funny cartoon she'd watched, about the Jell-O she'd had for dinner. In these moments, Ava wasn't a waitress. She was just a sister. Her world shrunk down to the size of this small room, her only purpose to see a smile on Penny's face. As she was getting ready to leave, her phone buzzed. It was a text from a coworker, a kind-hearted busboy named Sam. "You okay? Heard Blackwood was on a tear tonight. Don't let him get to you." Ava texted back a quick thanks before tucking her phone away. The solidarity of the staff was another small lifeline. They were a dysfunctional family, bonded by their shared servitude and their mutual disdain for patrons like Blackwood. Walking home through the quiet, late-night streets of her far-flung Queens neighborhood, the city lights that seemed so magical from the 54th floor now looked cold and distant. She thought about the paper she had picked up for Blackwood. It was a prospectus for a biomedical company, Innovate Life Sciences. She'd only glanced at it for a second, but the name stuck in her head. Her mind, trained to find patterns and details, filed it away. Her thoughts also drifted to another regular at the restaurant, a man who was the polar opposite of Harrison Blackwood. His name was Mr. Abernathy. He was a quiet, elderly gentleman who always sat at the bar, nursing a single glass of sherry for hours. He dressed in slightly old-fashioned but well-kept tweed jackets, and he had kind, watery blue eyes behind thick spectacles. He never demanded anything, always said please and thank you, and left a generous tip for the bartenders. He was always there on the nights Blackwood came in. Ava had noticed he would watch the billionaire, not with fear or awe, but with a strange, almost clinical curiosity. Tonight, as Ava had walked away from Blackwood's table after the clumsy girl comment, her eyes had briefly met Mr. Abernathy's. He had given her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of quiet support that had meant more to her than Sam's text. It was a look that said, "I see you. I see what you're putting up with." Who was he? A retired professor? A lonely widower? In a place like the Gilded Spoon, everyone had a story, a reason for being there. Blackwood's was written in headlines and stock prices. Ava's was written in medical charts and whispered prayers. Mr. Abernathy's story was a mystery, one that Ava, in her exhaustion, felt a faint flicker of curiosity about. Back in her small apartment, a tiny studio she could barely afford, Ava pulled out her old art history textbook. She hadn't opened it in months. She flipped through the glossy pages, the images of masterpieces by Caravaggio and Artemisia Gentileschi, a balm to her frayed nerves. She stopped at a painting by Caravaggio, The Calling of St. Matthew. In it, Christ, cloaked in shadow, points a finger at Matthew, a tax collector, sitting at a table counting money, surrounded by his cronies. A single beam of light illuminates Matthew's face, capturing the moment of his shock, his calling, his life's pivot point. Ava stared at the image. The artist's use of chiaroscuro, the dramatic interplay of light and shadow, had always fascinated her. The darkness that concealed, the light that revealed. She thought of the Gilded Spoon, a place of bright, artificial light that concealed so much darkness. She thought of Blackwood, a man living in the gilded cage of his own wealth, cloaked in a shadow of his own making. And she thought of that single brief moment of eye contact, that flash of defiance, a tiny beam of light in a very dark room. She closed the book, the image lingering in her mind. Something about Blackwood's particular brand of cruelty felt personal. It wasn't just the arrogance of a rich man, it was something deeper, something more wounded. The way he had lashed out at the young entrepreneur, the way he isolated himself even when surrounded by people. It was the behavior of a man at war, not with the world, but with himself. And as she finally drifted off to sleep, a strange, unsettling thought surfaced, the name on the prospectus she'd picked up. Innovate Life Sciences. It sounded vaguely familiar, but not from the financial news. She felt a faint nagging pull, a connection she couldn't quite place. It was a loose thread in the tapestry of her exhausting life, and she had a feeling that if she pulled it, the entire picture might unravel. A week later, the city was in the grip of a miserable, bone-chilling rain. It fell in relentless sheets, turning the streets into murky rivers and blurring the skyline into a gray, impressionistic smudge. It was the kind of night that made people cancel reservations, but not Harrison Blackwood. The weather, like the feelings of others, was an inconvenience he simply refused to acknowledge. He arrived at the Gilded Spoon looking like a storm cloud in human form, his mood even fouler than the weather. He was late, his suit damp, and his face was a mask of thunder. Gregory, the maitre d', intercepted him with an umbrella and a torrent of solicitous apologies for the rain, as if he controlled the heavens. Blackwood brushed past him without a word and marched to table 7. By some cruel twist of fate, it was Ava's section again. "It seems I am to be blessed with your presence once more," Blackwood said as she approached. It wasn't a greeting. It was an accusation. "Let's hope you've worked on your coordination." Ava simply inclined her head. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwood. The usual?" "No," he snapped. "I'm not in the mood for whiskey. Bring me the wine list. And not the digest version you palm off on tourists. I want the full cellar list, the one bound in leather." Ava retrieved the tome, a heavy leather-bound book that weighed nearly 10 pounds, and presented it to him. He spent 20 minutes poring over it, occasionally muttering dismissive comments about the vineyard or the vintage, before settling on a bottle of Chateau Petrus that cost more than Ava's monthly rent. As she went to retrieve it from the cellar, Chef Antoine pulled her aside. "Be careful tonight, Ava," he warned, his French accent thick with concern. His company, Blackwood Industries, their stock took a massive hit today. Something about a failed pharmaceutical trial. He will be explosive. Ava's blood ran cold. A failed pharmaceutical trial. The name from the prospectus flashed in her mind. Innovate Life Sciences. She made a mental note to look it up later. For now, she had a volcano to serve. The evening was a masterclass in psychological torture. The wine was corked, though the sommelier swore it was perfect. The steak was a travesty to the cow that died for it. He demanded his table be moved a few inches to the left, then a few inches back to its original position. He berated Ava for walking too loudly, for standing too close, for not anticipating his every whim before he'd even formed it in his mind. Ava moved through it all with the grace of a seasoned diplomat navigating a minefield. She was polite, efficient, and unshakable. Inside, however, the pressure was building. Her mind kept straying to Penny, to the new round of chemo that was making her sister weaker than ever, to the mounting pile of bills on her small kitchen table. Blackwood's casual, thoughtless cruelty felt like a personal affront to her struggle, a mockery of every sacrifice she was making. The breaking point came unexpectedly, over something small and insignificant. Blackwood had finished his main course and was staring out the window, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Ava approached to clear his plate. On the small side table next to him sat his briefcase. Leaning against it was a small framed photograph that he sometimes brought with him, always placed facing him. Ava had caught glimpses of it before. It was a picture of a young girl with bright, laughing eyes and long auburn hair, not unlike Ava's own. As Ava reached for his plate, her elbow, clad in her crisp white uniform, accidentally brushed against the frame. It was a feather-light touch, but it was enough. The small frame tipped over with a soft clatter, landing face down on the polished wood of the side table. The silence that followed was absolute. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Blackwood turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto the overturned photograph. A dark, terrifying change came over his face. The calculated anger vanished, replaced by a raw, guttural fury. It was as if Ava hadn't just knocked over a picture. She had desecrated a tomb. "You?" he hissed, his voice trembling with a rage that was shocking in its intensity. He stood up, knocking his chair backward. "You clumsy, incompetent fool. Do you have any idea what you've done?" He reached out and snatched the frame, his hands shaking. He turned it over, his thumb stroking the glass as if to soothe a wound. Ava was frozen for a second, stunned by the ferocity of his reaction. "Mr. Blackwood, I am so sorry. It was an accident." "An accident?" he spat, his voice rising to a roar that silenced every corner of the restaurant. Everyone was staring. "You people are all the same. You walk through life breaking things you don't understand. Precious things. Irreplaceable things." He pointed a trembling finger at her. "You have no idea of value, of loss." And then he said the words that shattered her composure. "You are worthless, a nobody, serving people who matter. You probably have nothing and no one in your pathetic life that has any meaning. What could you possibly know about losing something precious?" Something inside Ava snapped. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a primal, instinctual reaction. The years of swallowed insults, the nights spent by Penny's bedside, the crushing weight of her responsibilities, and the raw injustice of his words, it all erupted. Her voice when she spoke was not loud, but it cut through the silence with the clarity of a ringing bell. "You're wrong," she said. Blackwood stared at her, momentarily speechless. Ava took a step forward. The fear was gone, replaced by a white-hot, righteous anger. "You sit here in your tower of money, and you dare to lecture me about value? About loss?" She could feel the eyes of every patron, every staff member, fixed on her. "You think because you have billions, your pain is worth more than anyone else's? You think my life has no meaning?" Her voice grew stronger, imbued with a conviction that stunned the room. "Let me tell you about my life, Mr. Blackwood. I work 2 jobs to pay for medical treatments for my 9-year-old sister. She is fighting for every single breath in a hospital room not 10 miles from here. So you're damn right, I know what it's like to be terrified of losing something precious. I know it every single second of every single day. She gestured around the opulent room. This? This is nothing. This is just gold paint and expensive laundry. The things that matter, they can't be bought, and they certainly can't be measured by the pathetic way you treat people to feel powerful. She looked directly at the photograph in his hand. I don't know who that little girl is, but I can guarantee she would be ashamed of the man you are tonight. A collective gasp went through the room. Gregory, the maitre d', was pale as a sheet, frozen in place halfway to their table. Chef Antoine stood at the kitchen door, his jaw slack. Mr. Abernathy at the bar had put down his sherry and was watching with an intense, unreadable expression. Harrison Blackwood looked as if Ava had struck him. The rage drained from his face, replaced by a stunned, hollow look. He stared at her, then down at the photograph, then back at her. The fury in his eyes was gone, replaced by something else, something Ava couldn't decipher. It looked like shock, and for a fleeting moment, an agony so profound it was terrifying to behold. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He slowly sank back into his chair, his gaze fixed on the photograph. He looked smaller, older, a collapsed star whose gravitational pull had suddenly vanished. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Finally, Gregory scurried forward. "Miss Rosewood," he stammered, his voice a panicked whisper. "My office, now." Ava didn't look at Blackwood again. She turned on her heel, her back straight, and walked away from the table, through the sea of stunned, silent faces. She had no idea what would happen next, but as she walked toward Gregory's office to be fired, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt free. The walk to Gregory's office felt like a march to the gallows, yet Ava's legs felt strangely light. The adrenaline from the confrontation coursed through her, a dizzying cocktail of terror and exhilaration. She was acutely aware of the whispers that erupted in her wake, the scrape of chairs as patrons leaned in to confer, the frantic, hushed tones of the other staff members. She had detonated a bomb in the heart of the Gilded Spoon, and the shock wave was still expanding. Gregory's office was a small, cluttered space behind the reception area, a stark contrast to the restaurant's public face. He slumped into his chair, looking 10 years older than he had an hour ago. He ran a hand over his slick-back hair, dislodging a few strands. He couldn't meet her eyes. "Ava," he began, his voice strained. "What am I supposed to do? You know the rules. You know who he is." "I do," Ava said calmly. "And I know what he said was wrong." "Wrong?" Gregory let out a short, hysterical laugh. "Of course it was wrong. The man is a tyrant. We all know that. But he pays our salaries, Ava. He keeps the lights on in this place. His annual spending here could fund a small restaurant for a year. You don't talk back to the king, even if he's a mad one." He finally looked at her, his expression a mixture of pity and exasperation. "I have to let you go. You know that. His office has already called, twice. They want you gone. Immediately. They want your name, your file. They want to make sure you never work in this city again." The threat was chilling, but Ava felt a strange sense of detachment. "I understand," she said. It was the only thing she could say. "I'm sorry, Ava, truly," Gregory said, and she believed he was. "You're the best waitress I've ever had, but my hands are tied." He pushed an envelope across the desk. "Your final pay, and a little extra, for what it's worth." Ava took the envelope, turned, and walked out of the office. She collected her belongings from her locker in a daze, ignoring the sympathetic and shocked looks from her coworkers. Sam, the busboy, pressed a crumpled piece of paper into her hand. "My number," he whispered, "if you need anything." She nodded her thanks, unable to speak. As she stepped out of the service elevator and into the rain-soaked night, the reality of her situation began to sink in. She was unemployed. She was a target of a vindictive billionaire. The fund for Penny's treatment had just been cut off at its source. Panic began to bubble in her chest, cold and sharp. What had she done? Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Annoyed, she pulled it out, expecting texts from her coworkers. Instead, she saw dozens of notifications from social media apps she rarely used. Her name was trending. A video, shot shakily on a phone from a nearby table, had been uploaded. It started just as Blackwood was yelling, his voice booming. It captured his cruel words perfectly. And then it captured her reply. Her clear, defiant voice cutting through the tension. Her speech about her sister. The stunned silence. The camera had zoomed in on Blackwood's face at the end, capturing that raw, hollowed-out expression. The video had gone viral. The title was simple: Waitress vs. Billionaire. Within an hour, it had hundreds of thousands of views. The comments section was a torrent of support for her and vitriol for him. Team Ava and Cancel Blackwood were trending. News outlets were already picking it up, writing short articles, embedding the video. Her act of defiance hadn't happened in a vacuum. It had been broadcast to the world. Ava stood under a dripping awning, staring at her phone in disbelief. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but also vindicated. People had seen, they had heard, they understood. Her phone rang. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Is this Miss Ava Rosewood?" A calm, cultured voice asked. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Arthur Abernathy. We haven't been formally introduced, but I was at the bar at the Gilded Spoon this evening." Ava's mind raced. "Mr. Abernathy," the quiet old man in tweed. "I remember you, sir." "I imagine you are feeling rather overwhelmed at the moment," he said, "and I suspect you are now unemployed." "That's one way to put it," Ava said, a wry, tired smile touching her lips. "I was hoping I might have a word with you, Miss Rosewood. I believe I can help, not just with your current employment situation, but with the larger matter concerning Mr. Blackwood." His voice was steady, serious. "And perhaps with the matter of your sister's health." That last sentence hit her like a physical blow. How do you know about my sister?" "I'm a very observant man," Mr. Abernathy said, "and I make it my business to know things. I know you've been working tirelessly to pay for an experimental treatment at St. Jude's. I also happen to be on the board of governors for that very hospital." Ava leaned against the cold brick wall, the rain forgotten. The world had tilted on its axis twice in one night. I don't understand." "It's quite simple, my dear," he said, his voice kind. "I have been watching Harrison Blackwood for a very long time. What you did tonight was braver than you know. You didn't just stand up to a bully, you threw a stone at a fortress I have been trying to breach for years. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? There is a great deal we need to discuss." He named a small cafe near her apartment, a place she knew well. Ava, her mind reeling, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and suspicion, agreed. As she hung up, she finally took a moment to investigate the name she'd been trying to place. Innovate Life Sciences. She typed it into her phone's search browser, along with Blackwood Industries. The search results flooded her screen. Blackwood Industries had been the primary investor in Innovate Life Sciences, a small but brilliant biotech firm. Their flagship project was a revolutionary new gene therapy treatment, LeukoClear, designed to target rare and aggressive forms of pediatric leukemia. The same type Penny had. The articles from Today were brutal. LeukoClear had failed its final stage clinical trial, spectacularly. The results were not just ineffective. They had caused severe adverse reactions in several test subjects. The stock had plummeted, wiping out billions in valuation. Blackwood's investment was a total loss. Ava stared at the screen, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying, sickening snap. Blackwood hadn't just lost money. The failed trial wasn't just a business deal gone sour. It was personal. The treatment he had poured hundreds of millions into, the one that had just failed. It was the kind of treatment that could have saved a child like Penny. It was the kind of treatment that could have saved the little girl in the photograph. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. Harrison Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries, has been admitted to New York Presbyterian Hospital following a suspected cardiac event. The fallout was no longer just about a viral video or a lost job. It was a cascade of ruin, for him and for her, and a mysterious old man held the key to understanding why. The next morning, the rain had cleared, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming under a pale, watery sun. The cafe Mr. Abernathy had chosen was a cozy, unpretentious spot with the rich aroma of coffee and baked bread. It was a world away from the sterile grandeur of the Gilded Spoon. Ava, who hadn't slept a wink, sat nursing a cup of black coffee, her nerves stretched taut. Arthur Abernathy arrived precisely on time, looking just as he did at the restaurant bar. Unassuming in his tweed jacket, his kind eyes magnified by his spectacles. He carried a worn leather briefcase. "Miss Rosewood," he said with a warm smile, extending a hand. "Thank you for meeting me. Please call me Arthur." "Ava," she replied, shaking his firm, dry hand. He settled into the chair opposite her, placing his briefcase on the floor. "I won't waste your time with pleasantries," he began, his tone shifting from friendly to serious. "I owe you an explanation and an apology." Ava frowned. "An apology? For what?" "For sitting by and watching you endure that man for so long. You see, my interest in Harrison Blackwood is not casual. It is deeply personal. And what you did last night, you accomplished in 1 minute what I have failed to do in 15 years. He leaned forward, his voice low. "Harrison Blackwood and I were once business partners. More than that, we were friends. Best friends. We started our first company together in a garage. Two ambitious young men who wanted to change the world." He spoke of a young, brilliant, and driven Harrison Blackwood, a man Ava could scarcely imagine. A man who was passionate, who laughed, who had a family he adored, a wife, Catherine, and a daughter, Lily. Lily was the girl in the photograph. "Lily was the center of his universe," Arthur said, his eyes clouding with memory. "She was a vibrant, joyful child. She loved to paint. Her hair was the same shade of auburn as yours. She looked a great deal like you, in fact." Ava felt a chill run down her spine. 15 years ago," Arthur continued, his voice thick with old grief. "When Lily was 9 years old, she was diagnosed with the same disease your sister has, a rare aggressive leukemia." The coffee cup felt heavy in Ava's hands. The world seemed to slow down, the pieces of the puzzle rearranging themselves into a picture of heartbreaking clarity. Harrison fell apart, but he was a man of action, of power. He refused to accept the prognosis. He poured his entire fortune, our company's fortune, into finding a cure. He established private research grants, headhunted the best scientists, bullied his way into the top echelons of medical research. He was obsessed. I was the one trying to hold our actual business together. "What happened?" Ava whispered. "We found a promising experimental treatment. The science was new, untested. The doctors at St. Jude's warned him it was too risky, that the preliminary data was unstable. They advised a more conservative, established protocol, but Harrison wouldn't listen. He saw it as his one shot to play God, to bend the world to his will and save his daughter. He pulled her from the hospital against medical advice and funded a private, accelerated trial for her. Just for her." Arthur paused, taking a moment to compose himself. "The treatment? It was a disaster. It didn't just fail to help her. It accelerated the disease. Lily died less than 2 months later, in excruciating pain." Ava closed her eyes, a wave of nausea washing over her. She pictured Penny, so small and fragile, and imagined that kind of desperate, catastrophic gamble. Catherine, his wife, never forgave him. She saw it as the ultimate act of hubris. She believed he had killed their daughter with his pride. She left him a year later. Harrison lost everything that mattered in the span of a year. His daughter, his wife, and his soul. Arthur leaned back, his story casting a long, dark shadow over the sunny cafe. "The man you see today, the monster in the Gilded Spoon, was born from that tragedy. He built Blackwood Industries into an empire, but it's a hollow kingdom. He surrounds himself with wealth to insulate himself from the memory of his failure. His cruelty is a shield. He pushes everyone away because he believes he is poison. He treats people as worthless because that is how he sees himself. And his rudeness to me," Ava began, understanding dawning. "My hair, the fact I'm a young woman, I reminded him of her." "Not just of her," Arthur corrected gently. "You reminded him of himself. He sees your struggle, your fight for your sister, as a reflection of his own. But you are succeeding where he failed. You are handling it with grace, with sacrifice, with love, all the things he abandoned. When he looks at you, he sees the man he could have been. It enrages him. And last night, when you knocked over that photograph, you didn't just knock over a frame. You knocked down the wall he has spent 15 years building. And when you told him that Lily would be ashamed of him, you spoke the deepest truth in his heart, a truth he has been running from for a decade and a half. The story was staggering. It didn't excuse Blackwood's behavior, but it explained it. It recontextualized every sneer, every insult, every act of petty tyranny. It was the lashing out of a man trapped in an endless, repeating nightmare of his own making. Innovate life sciences, Ava said. That was his second chance, wasn't it? To fund a cure, to finally succeed where he failed with Lily. Arthur nodded grimly. His shot at redemption. He pinned all his hopes on Loco Clear, and yesterday it failed. The news broke just hours before he came to the restaurant. He wasn't just having a bad day because his stock portfolio took a hit. He was watching his daughter die all over again. Ava was silent for a long time, processing the weight of it all. Why are you telling me this, Arthur? Because, my dear, you are the only person who has ever broken through to him. And because I want to help you, he said, finally reaching for his briefcase. He clicked it open and pulled out a file. As I said, I am on the board at St. Jude's. I am also the head of a rather large philanthropic foundation. After I parted ways with Harrison, I dedicated my life to funding the kind of careful, ethical, and promising medical research that he had tried to shortcut. We have been funding a different project, a T-cell therapy program at a facility in Boston. It's showing incredible results in cases just like your sister's. He pushed the file across the table. I took the liberty of having Penny's case files reviewed by the lead doctor this morning. He believes she would be an excellent candidate for the program. My foundation will cover every single cost. The treatment, travel, accommodations for you and your family. Everything. Ava stared at the file, then at Arthur's kind, earnest face. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the cheerful cafe into a swirl of light and color. For 2 years, she had been fighting this battle alone, carrying a burden that felt impossibly heavy, and now this stranger, this ghost from Blackwood's past, was offering her the one thing she had stopped allowing herself to have: hope. I don't know what to say, she choked out, the words thick with emotion. Say yes, Arthur said gently, and there is one more thing. Harrison is in the hospital. He had a minor heart attack last night after he left the restaurant. He's stable, but he's also broken. He's refusing to see anyone. But I think he might see you. I'm not asking you to forgive him, Ava, but I believe you are the only one who can offer him a path out of the hell he has built for himself. The choice is yours, of course. Your priority is your sister, but sometimes saving one life can help you save another. Ava looked out the window at the bustling New York street. Her life had been turned upside down in less than 24 hours. She had been fired, publicly vilified, and then vindicated. She had been offered a miracle for her sister, and now she was being asked to face the man who had caused her so much pain, not with anger, but with an understanding of his own profound tragedy. The tyrant of the gilded spoon was no longer a monster. He was just a man, lost in the shadow of a devastating, inconsolable grief. The private wing of New York Presbyterian Hospital was a hushed world of soft carpeting and contemporary art, a sterile luxury that felt a universe away from the life Ava knew. She felt the curious eyes of a nurse as she walked to the end of the hall, her heart a steady drum of apprehension and resolve. Pushing open the door to Harrison Blackwood's room, she found him looking utterly defeated. He was a diminished figure, swallowed by the crisp white sheets of the hospital bed. His granite features softened into something fragile. Wires snaked from his gown to monitors that beeped in a soft, steady rhythm, charting his damaged heart. The only personal item in the vast room was the small, framed photograph of Lily on his bedside table. He turned his head as Ava entered, his faded eyes showing no surprise, only a deep, bottomless weariness. Abernathy sent you, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper, stripped of its commanding rumble. He told me everything, Ava said, her own voice quiet. She stepped further into the room but kept a respectful distance. I came to say thank you. That got his attention. He turned back to her, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. Thank you? For what? For ruining your life? I know what my office tried to do. It's what I would have ordered. Arthur Abernathy is funding my sister's treatment, Ava explained, her words clear and direct. A new program in Boston. He says there's a real chance it could work. He wouldn't have approached me if it weren't for what happened at the restaurant. So, in a way, you're the reason my sister has a new hope. That's worth more than any job. Blackwood stared at her, the cogs of his brilliant, broken mind visibly turning, searching for an angle, a trap, a manipulation. He found none. A single tear traced a path down his weathered cheek. Her name was Lily, he rasped, his gaze drifting to the photo. She wanted to be an artist. I was studying art history, Ava found herself saying, before I had to drop out. A painful silence settled between them. What you said, Blackwood finally managed, his voice cracking with the effort of confession, at the restaurant, that she would be ashamed. You were right. The admission was a monumental effort, a tearing down of a wall brick by painful brick. I see her in every conquered competitor. I tell myself I'm building an empire in her name, but it's a lie. I built it on her grave, to hide from what I did. I was a proud, arrogant fool who thought his money could command miracles. You were a father trying to save his child, Ava said, surprised by the compassion in her own voice. I was a fool who killed her, he countered, a sliver of his old harsh strength returning. No, Ava said firmly, taking a step closer. The disease killed her. Grief and pride blinded you. That's not the same thing. She looked him directly in the eye, her gaze unflinching. You have a choice, Mr. Blackwood. You can let that grief kill you, too. Or you can decide to build something else, something she would actually be proud of. Her words hung in the air. Ava knew it was time to leave. My sister and I will be leaving for Boston next week, she said, her tone softening. I wish you a speedy recovery. She turned and walked to the door. As her hand touched the handle, his voice stopped her. Rosewood. She turned back. The Loco Clear Project, he said, his voice stronger. The research is flawed, but the data, it could be valuable to other programs. I'm signing over the entire patent portfolio to Arthur's foundation. No strings attached. Tell him to use it. If it can help save one child. His voice broke. Ava nodded slowly. I'll tell him. And Ava, he added, meeting her gaze. There was no artifice left, only a raw, painful vulnerability. I am sorry for everything. She held his gaze for a moment longer, gave a single brief nod of acknowledgement, and slipped out of the room. Months later, Ava stood in a bright, sunlit art studio, the smell of turpentine and oil paint a welcome perfume. Outside the large window, the Charles River glittered. Penny, her hair growing back in a soft, downy fuzz, was in remission. The treatment in Boston had been a quiet, steady miracle. Arthur's foundation had not only paid for everything, but had also insisted on funding Ava's return to a prestigious Boston art college. An envelope had arrived for her that morning. Inside, a brief note on heavy cream paper explained that HB had endowed a new wing at St. Jude's in Lily's name. It also established the Rosewood Grant, a full scholarship for students whose studies were interrupted by family medical crises. Tucked inside was a check large enough to erase every past and future financial worry. It wasn't a payoff. It was restitution. Ava put the letter down and looked at the canvas she was working on. It was a large, ambitious piece, depicting a dark, opulent dining room shattered by a single beam of light. In the shadows, a king-like figure sat alone, his face turned toward the light. Her life would forever be defined by that one night, that single moment of courage that cost her a job but gave back her dreams and saved her sister. She picked up her brush, dipped it in a vibrant, hopeful shade of gold, and touched it to the light on the canvas. That single moment of defiance didn't just change Ava's life. It sent ripples through the lives of everyone involved, proving that true strength isn't about the money in your bank account, but the conviction in your heart. It reminds us that behind every face, even the cruelest ones, there is a story, and sometimes a single act of courage is all it takes to bring the truth to light. What do you think? Was Ava right to stand up to him, knowing the risks? Have you ever witnessed a moment where one person's voice changed everything? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will make you think, feel, and believe in the power of the human spirit. Thanks for listening.